The one and only American who had been convicted of treason during the Korean War, being an extremely prolific but terrible writer, encompassing what science fiction novels have always been accused of, that is, having great ideas but are horribly executed, and having a fan base so minimal it can be boiled down to that of none other than the eccentric millionaire Elliot Rosewater. Kilgore Trout, whose many short stories and novels are published in world-class library, which might sound prestigious, but they are primarily in the business of publishing pornography. I'm Peg Vio, and this is Attention, and today we'll take a look at some of Kilgore Trout's failures as they were simultaneously his biggest accomplishments. Examining the role of an artist in society, leaving commentary on social issues in everything from the importance of community to environmental questions, Kilgore Trout left no stone unturned on this planet or the many in which he seems to have traveled. Since the height of the golden age of science fiction, kicking off in 1938, a noticeable stain, most noticeable to critics, has plagued the genre, and is still largely seen to this day, despite its constant efforts to wash itself clean from its pulp origins. And despite the fact that the genre did not get its start from these pulps, but from well-respected authors such as Mary Shelley, whether it was recognized at the time or not. A place often referred to as the sci-fi ghetto is where one would expect to find the majority of science fiction authors. A small but heavily populated area made up of science-loving writers ready for the tea units for whenever they arrive, and though many authors of the Golden Age are now considered innovators and are well-respected authors, such as Arthur C. Clarke, his work with Kubrick changed cinema, and Asimov, whose ideas are still being used in robotics to this day. One author that did not make it out of this sci-fi ghetto, but still managed to make an impact, was science fiction author Kilgore Trout. A pessimistic, oddly hopeful, and an all-around terrible writer, despite his inclination to great ideas and acutely observant details to social norms. It is a bit unclear to the year Trout was born, but some have suggested around late February of 1918 on Staten Island, New York. Others have suggested early November of 1922 in Indianapolis, Indiana. And then there are the written accounts that he was born in 1907 and died in 1981. However, there have also been many eyewitness accounts of a man claiming to be Kilgore Trout who told them that they were sick but are now well and that there is work to be done. These accounts circulated for a short time but ended around 2001. The reports on how he had passed away are just as mixed. Some reports suggest that he committed suicide by drinking Drano, while others have reported him to have died following a consultation with a psychic after informing him that George W. Bush Jr. would win a second term in office. Over the course of his career, he had accumulated over 117 novels and over 2,000 short stories. However, the exact number of publications he actually had are also unknown, as many of the magazines that were willing to print his work have long been out of circulation. But what we do know of Kilgore Trout is that despite his constant failures as a writer, he did continue as though critics would eventually look past his ability to write and give more a focus on what he was writing about. Of course, this never happened. But for the few that were able to look past his terrible writing, they would find, as they put it, wonderful new lies. Places that would take them away from the meaninglessness that they felt that life had offered them here in the real world. And here to mention a little bit more on that matter, of course, the most well-known and possibly the only true fan of Kilgore Trout's work, as far as we know, a man who probably had more money than most people should, Mr. Elliot Rosewater. A man who was quite vocal about this science fiction author and is recorded to have said that the Brothers Karamazov contains everything one ought to know about life, but that the book just isn't enough anymore. This statement reveals not what Rosewater felt he needed in life, but what he felt the world needed at the time. He supposedly had said this sometime around the end of World War II. A time when the world had, for a moment, forgot to ask the question of being and their purpose on Earth. They would have rather have not asked questions at all, but instead escaped the harsh realities that came with life following the war efforts. People no longer needed a Dostoevsky, they needed a Kilgore Trout. However, this is also quite unfortunate, as he never got the recognition. To take a further look into this idea in which Rosewater stated, we will take a look at a short story by Kilgore Trout titled The Gutless Wonder, a story that is almost impossible to find today in print. The Gutless Wonder follows a robot with bad breath. Yes, a robot with a serious case of halitosis. Okay, now this robot with bad breath was also a robot who had dropped jellied petroleum from a plane onto unexpected human citizens. This mass-murdering robot with bad breath was ultimately shunned by society, in which you would think for good reasons. However, as we come to find out, after the robot cures his halitosis, he is then welcomed back into society. He is no longer a mass murderer with bad breath, but just an average friendly neighborhood mass murderer. This story exemplifies the message that Mr. Rosewater conveyed following the war. That is, people no longer asked the big questions to life because they witnessed firsthand the supposed temporality of life. It was no longer about what does all this mean or why are we here, but a more of a I am here, and those who are not bothered by bad breath. But I am, so fix it. With no more questions to ask, the only thing left is the immediate now, whenever that may be. Dostoevsky and philosophy in general is concerned with the big picture, whereas Kilgore Trout's stories were concerned with a small photograph of only you in an album titled Community. Alright, thank you, Stellar. One could also look at this story, The Gutless Wonder, as a portrayal of how war dehumanizes the individual. The robot with halitosis has every characteristic of being human, except has no sense of guilt. By welcoming this robot back into society, the society itself is admitting its own dehumanization. War does not only dehumanize the individual who is directly involved, but indirectly the society that allows it to happen. This story is a strong example of his bad writing but good idea approach. There is nowhere in the story that explains how a robot could have a biological defect, but it does convey an idea that is still profound today. All in all, Kilgore Trout was a writer who did not believe he was such, simply because the world did not allow him to believe he was, which I'm more than certain is a common and highly relatable feeling for many writers. Are we really going to go this whole video without mentioning? I hope you enjoyed this short video on science fiction author Kilgore Trout, and if you'd like to see more content like this, be sure to hit like and subscribe, and hope to see you next week.